Okay, so when we last left off, we left our friend Roscuro at a party. And this rat didn't invite himself to just any party. Roscuro had invited himself to the king and the queen's party. Now this party was the king and the queen and the Princess P and all the king and queen's men and the minstrels and the jesters. It was quite a big ordeal. And Roscuro fell in love with how much light there was. He talked about how there was light sparkling off their crowns and glistening from the jesters' hats. He even talked about the chandelier and how beautiful it was. So he decided, like all rats do, to crawl up to the chandelier and watch the party from there. As you can see, he's not doing a very good job of hanging on because Roscuro falls into the queen's bowl of soup. Now, remember way back when we were reading about our friend Despero and how the king didn't like him very much because his family had a long, dark history with rats. Chapter 21. The Queen's Last Words. The Queen loved soup. She loved soup more than anything in the world except for the Princess P and the King. And because the Queen loved it, soup was served in the castle for every banquet, every lunch, and every dinner. And what soup it was! Cook's love and admiration of the Queen and her palate moved the broth that she concocted from a level of mere food into high arts. On this particular day, for this particular banquet, Cook had outdone herself. The soup was a masterwork, a delicate mingling of chicken, watercress, and garlic. Roscuro, as he surfaced from the bottom of the Queen's bowl, could not help but take a few appreciative sips. Roscuro was already in the bowl of soup. I mean, he might as well drink some of it, right? Lovely, he said, distracted for a moment from the mystery of his existence. Delightful. See, shouted P. See, she stood. She pointed her finger right at Roscuro. It is a rat. I told you it was a rat. He was hanging from the chandelier and now he's in Mama's soup. The musicians stopped playing their guitars. The jugglers stopped juggling and the noble people stopped eating. The Queen looked at Roscuro. Roscuro looked at the Queen. Reader, in the spirit of honesty, I must utter a difficult and unsavory truth. Rats are not beautiful creatures. They are not even cute. They are really rather nasty beasts, particularly if one happens to appear in your bowl of soup with watercress clinging to his whiskers. There was a long moment of silence, and then Roscuro said to the Queen, I beg your pardon. In response, the Queen flung her spoon into the air and made an incredible noise. A noise that was in no way worthy of a queen. A noise somewhere between the neigh of a horse and the squeal of a pig. A noise that sounded something like this. Neigh! And then she said, There's a rat in my soup! The Queen was really a simple soul, and always her whole life had done nothing except for state the overly obvious. She died as she lived. There's a rat in my soup! Were the last words she ever said. She clutched her chest and fell over backward. Her royal chair hit the floor with a thump and the banquet hall exploded. Spoons were dropped, chairs were flung back. Save her, ordered the king. You must save her. All the king's men ran to try to rescue the Queen. Roscuro climbed out of the bowl of soup. He felt that under the circumstances, it'd probably be best if he left. As he crawled across the tablecloth, he remembered the words of the prisoner in the dungeon. His regret that he did not look back at his daughter as he left her behind. And so Roscuro turns. He looked back, and he saw that the princess was glaring at him. Her eyes were filled with disgust and anger. Go back to the dungeon was the look that her eyes were giving him. Go back to the darkness where you belong. This look, reader, broke Roscuro's heart. Did you think that rats didn't have hearts? Wrong. All living things have a heart, and the heart of any living thing can be broken. If the rat had not looked over his shoulder, perhaps his heart would not have been broken. And it is possible then that I would not have a story to tell you. But reader, he did look. Chapter 22, he puts his heart together again. Roscuro hurried from the banquet hall. A rat, he said. and he put a paw over his heart. I am a rat, and there is no light for rats. There will be no light for me. The king's men were still bent over the queen. The king was still shouting, save her, save her! And the queen was still dead, of course, when Roscuro encountered the queen's royal soup spoon lying on the floor. I will have something beautiful, he said aloud. I am a rat, but I will have something beautiful. I will have a crown of my own. So he picked up the spoon and put it on his head. Nice crown, huh? Oh, Roscuro. Yes, said Roscuro, I will have something beautiful, and I will have revenge. Both things somehow. There are those hearts, reader, that never mend again once they're broken. Or if they do mend, they heal themselves in a crooked and lopsided way, as if sewn together by a careless craftsman. Such was the fate of our friend Chiaroscuro. His heart was broken. Picking up the spoon and placing it on his head, speaking of revenge. Sorry, that's my dog Storm. Speaking of revenge, these things helped him put his heart together again, but it was, alas, put together wrong. Where is the rat? Shouted the king. Find that rat! If you want me, muttered Roscuro as he left the banquet hall, I'll be in the dungeon, in the darkness. Chapter 23, Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences of Roscuro's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Roscuro gnawed on Gregory the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face, and because a match was lit in his face, his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this, he journeyed upstairs seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess Peace spotted him and called out the word rat. And because of this, Roscuro fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the queen's soup, the queen died. You can see, can't you, how everything is related to something else. You can see quite clearly how every action has a consequence. For instance, if you will indulge me and allow me to continue in this meditation of consequences, because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. That means he made soup illegal. And because soup was outlawed, so were all of the instruments involved in the making and eating of soup. Spoons, bowls, and kettles. These things were collected from all the people in the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled into the dungeon. Do you remember at the beginning it said that there was a bowl, like towers of soup, spoons, bowls, and kettles in the dungeon? Now we know why. And because Roscuro was dazzled by the light of one match and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup and the queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing rats is that you must first find the rats. And if a rat does not want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded only in getting lost in the dungeon's torturous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not even find their way out and died there in the dark heart of the castle. And so the killing of all the rats was not successful, and in desperation, King Philip declared that rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law, as rats are already outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It is a waste of time and energy, but still the king officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you are a king, you may make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That's what being a king is all about. But reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen, and without her he was lost. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making soup illegal, outlawing rats, these things soothed the king's poor heart, and so we must forgive him. And what of outlawed rats? What of one outlaw rat in particular? What about Chiaroscuro? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest with his spoon on top of his head. He set to work fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of a scrap of the red tablecloth. As he worked, old one-ear Botticelli Remorso sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, saying, "You see what comes from a rat going upstairs? I hope you learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," said Roscuro, "yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for the way that she looked at me." And as Roscuro worked and planned, the jailer Gregory held tight to his rope and made his own way through the darkness. In a dank cell, the prisoner, who had once had a red tablecloth, now had nothing, spent his days and his nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon, upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brothers and sisters sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to a sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences for the mouse's love of music. You, reader, already know some of those consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to a princess. He would fall in love. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle, hearing music for the first time, outside the castle, in the gloom of dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon driven by a king's soldier, piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles, was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldier there sat a young girl with ears that looked nothing so much as pieces of cauliflower stuck on either side of her head. This girl's name, reader, was Miggery Soap. And though she did not know it yet, she would be an instrumental part in helping the rat get his revenge. End of the second book.